Hello, and welcome to our monthly metaphysical lesson. This month, we explored the idea of freedom and the responsibility that comes with it. Our lesson is inspired by Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 through 18 and 22 through 26. You were called to freedom, brothers and sisters, only don't let this freedom be an opportunity to indulge in your selfish impulses, but serve each other through love. All the law has been fulfilled in a single statement: love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour each other, be careful that you don't get eaten up by each other. I say, be guided by the Spirit, and you won't carry out your selfish desires. A person's selfish desires are set against the Spirit, and the Spirit is set against one's selfish desires. They are opposed to each other, so you shouldn't do whatever you want to do. But if you are being led by the Spirit, you aren't under the law. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against things like this. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified self with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let's follow the Spirit. Let's not become arrogant, make each other angry, or be jealous of each other. Again, that's Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 through 18 and 22 through 26. What is freedom? How do we know when we're truly free? This is the time of year when we as Americans focus on our heritage as a nation and the freedoms that have been established by the founders and our representatives throughout our country's history. We hear so much discussion in the news and on social media about our constitutional freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and so on. We talk so much about freedom, but how much of this talk actually promotes our freedom, and how much of it is used to limit it? We see people around us acting in the name of freedom, but so often that freedom is about their own personal choices, not about the freedom of us all. That's where we get into sticky territory. A few days ago, I woke up early, and while lying there halfway between sleep and wake, I heard a clear, strong voice say, "Not yet free." I don't normally hear random voices, especially so clear, so I felt like I needed to pay attention. No other words followed, but as I meditated on it, the meaning became clear. One person's freedom at the expense of another's is not freedom at all. If everyone is not free, then no one is free. This is what inspired our discussion today. Otherwise, we might be talking about finding our happiness. But maybe we can do both. Our scripture lesson features Paul's letter to the people of Galatia, an ancient land in what is now Turkey, about the lessons taught by his mentor, Jesus. He reminds them that freedom is wonderful, but it should never come from a place of selfish desire, but rather from a place of love and compassion. The name Galatia comes from the Greek, meaning white as milk, or as you can imagine, a symbol of purity. Metaphysically, places in the Bible represent the consciousness of the people who live there, an aspect of our own consciousness. In that context, Galatia represents a state of pure truth, but the simplest of truth, as might be perceived by a child, and perhaps not ready to fully comprehend the spiritual meaning behind it. All of us are Galatians at some point. We understand basic meanings, but we don't always understand the more subtle implications, or how to put them to the best use. We as humans have a tendency to get in our own way. We tend to focus on what is closest to us, our own desires and needs, before we think about how those desires might affect someone else. We don't usually mean any harm. That's the childlike purity of thought. But that doesn't mean we don't trip ourselves up along the way. That is the point of our lesson today. Our sense of freedom begins with our own desires, and those desires and ideas don't always align with those of the people around us. Merriam-Webster has 10 different definitions for the word freedom. Let's look at just the first 4. First, the absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in a choice or an action. Next, liberation from restraint or from the power of another. Third, the state of being exempt or released, usually from something onerous. And fourth, unrestricted use. If you think carefully about these definitions, you'll find one important aspect that they all have in common. They have to do with separation, a clear distinction between our own will and the will of others. The word freedom is naturally imbued with an energy of conflict. Unless our will aligns with everyone else's, our freedom will be at stake. And with all of the people in our world, there are a lot of different expressions of that will. So what do we do? Let's take a closer look at Paul's epistle and see what he has to say about it. He cautions us to avoid looking for freedom in our personal desires. I didn't mention all of the examples he gave, but he enumerates a lot of selfish aspects of our personality and our nature that we should probably avoid. They're pretty obvious, and I don't want to focus on negativity, so I've skipped over these things. Just the same, we as humans can be pretty pushy about what we want. Most of us have an idea of the way we'd like things to be in a, quote, perfect world. A world designed in our mind, based on our own preferences and likes. Everyone's vision is a little bit different. When we build our world on these personal ideas, we are shutting out the rest of humanity, often creating an expectation that others can never live up to. Yes, that is ultimate freedom personally, but what effect does it have on everyone else's? Paul clearly states that freedom is not doing whatever you want to do. He uses a visual of biting and devouring. Our sense of freedom based on personal desire can result in biting and devouring others, and in the end, we end up eating each other up. Instead, he advises us to act spiritually. He says that if you're being led by the Spirit, you aren't under the law. You aren't under the law. Think about that sentence for just a moment. What does that mean? Paul is not saying that we're exempt from the law. The laws of man and of nature still apply to us no matter what we do. But when we act from a spiritual place, we are free from the law. Here's a real-life example. A few years back, the city of Alexandria, Virginia, put cameras up at many of the traffic lights in town to catch people running red lights. They also have radar-based cameras that detect excessive driving speed. They couldn't station a police officer at each intersection and on every street in order to catch the lawbreakers, so the camera offered an option to be many places at once. Over the course of just a few months, the city issued more than 10,000 tickets, and people were furious. They felt that their privacy was being invaded, and that Big Brother was oppressing them, and that the government was trying to take all their money. But why were they so upset? Were they upset because the law is being enforced? Or were they upset because it's so much easier to get caught? Yes, citizens have a right to drive wherever they want to, and as fast as they want to. That is an expression of freedom based on selfish desire. But those citizens also have a responsibility to respect safety laws, and they earn even more responsibility if they cause harm because they ignored those laws. It's not rocket science. If we follow the rules of the road, we will probably never get a ticket. It's so easy to do, and so easy to avoid consequences. That is what Paul means when he talks about not being under the law. Yes, there are laws, but laws are meaningless if we never break them. There is no law against being a good person. And being a good person includes following through with responsibility for our errors. I'll admit that I've gotten speeding tickets issued by a camera, several times. But did I complain? Well, I did once because there was no speed limit posted, but otherwise, I have willingly pulled out my checkbook and paid the fine. I wasn't trying to break the law, but I did. Getting angry at the ticket, or the camera, or the police, or the city, or most importantly, myself, wouldn't have accomplished anything except conflict. Remaining level-headed and assuming my role in the situation makes it all pass more peacefully, and makes me more free. Free to move past a challenging situation, and also free from unproductive emotions and self-condemnation. And I also had a little sense of pride for doing the right thing, even if my checking account balance was a little smaller for the effort. Not what I expected or desired, but meaningful just the same. Rather than seeing the world around us based on our own selfish desires, which can lead to confrontation, Paul suggests that we learn to respond to the world around us with an energy of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and maybe most importantly, self-control. He called these the fruit of the Spirit. Paul is plainly encouraging us to nourish each other instead of eating each other alive. And when we do, that loving light casts out all shadows. He reinforces what Jesus called the highest commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. This is the key that unlocks his message. When we act from a place of community instead of self-interest, we respect our mutual freedom, rather than imposing our free will without regard for negative impacts that could otherwise abound. Love your neighbor as yourself. The U.S. Constitution guarantees freedoms that we sometimes take for granted, but that document doesn't say that those freedoms are meant to be absolute. We have the right of free speech. We literally can say anything we want, but that doesn't mean there aren't consequences when our words cause harm to someone else. We have a right to assemble peacefully, but if we become an angry mob, there's a price to pay for our actions. We have the right to protect ourselves, but there are laws against using that form of protection to kill or overpower others. When we overstep our personal freedoms, we begin to step on other people's freedoms, and then freedom ceases to exist. You may have noticed that I skipped over our freedom of religion. I did this intentionally. In divine metaphysics, we define religion as seeking an understanding of natural, physical, and spiritual laws and living accordingly. That religion, that understanding, is a personal experience between me and creation, expressed in a way that works for me. I have the freedom to do this, or not, from my own point of reference, and honor that connection with all that is, or not, in a way that's meaningful to me. And so do you. Even if I'm worshiping with a group of 1,000 like-minded people, each one of us is experiencing our religion in a different way. If I expect other people to believe the way I do, or condemn others for not doing so, by definition, it stops being religion. If I'm not making room for other people to believe in a different expression of faith, it stops being religion. If I'm not acting from a place of love and compassion, it's not religion. If I do any of these things, my freedom begins to take freedom away. And that's the perfect example of what Paul was trying to say. Act from love. Enjoy your freedom, but be mindful of the responsibility that comes with it, so you aren't diminishing someone else's freedom. John Foster Dulles, former senator and Secretary of State under Dwight Eisenhower, said, "Freedom and duty always go hand in hand, and if the free do not accept the duty of social responsibility, they will not remain long free." So going back to my original question, what is freedom? How do we know when we're truly free? It's not an easy question, and there's not an easy answer. But in my mind, I'm comfortable boiling it down to one word shared with me by a friend this week: harmony. If we're expressing our freedom from a place of kindness, compassion, and encouragement, we're going to find satisfaction in everything we do. We create an energy of harmony. And when we do, our personal desires and preferences stop meaning so much because we're finding happiness and enjoyment despite what we thought we wanted. And if we can find a way to fulfill our desires while maintaining that harmony, all the better. I think that's what Paul meant by those who belong to Jesus have crucified self with its passions and desires. This isn't talking about declaring our devotion to the man. It means that when we begin living in an energy of Christ consciousness, that love, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, we crucify our ego-based desires and avoid destroying ourselves and each other with them. This brings us back to the words that came to me in that moment of spontaneous meditation: not yet free. Yes, we have freedoms, but no, we are not yet free. As long as one person's freedoms restrict the freedoms of others, true freedom cannot exist. But it certainly is possible. As Paul reminds us, let's not become arrogant, make each other angry, or be jealous of each other. Let's be mindful of our responsibility, not only as individual people, but as a people, to exercise our prescribed freedoms in ways that promote harmony and unity. And then we shall be truly free. Let freedom ring. Namaste. For additional lessons and meditation ideas, visit our website at www.meditatewnc.org. Thank you for joining us.